Welcome to The Writer Reads Chronicles of a Dark God, Book 2, Dark God's Rise, Chapter 26. The Race Continues. Lady Kelhadria, half-sister to Lord Broderick Shandera, woke to the soft light of dawn stroking warm fingers across her hair. She was sitting, half-coiled, beside a rough camp stretcher, her head resting on its edge and her legs tucked uncomfortably beneath her. Someone had draped a blanket around her shoulders during the night, but she couldn't think of who. Deciding she'd thank them later, she raised her head and looked around, just as the man on the bed stirred restlessly, muttering something in his sleep. Instantly alert, she reached over to soothe him, laying the back of her hand on his forehead. It was cool and dry, and she relaxed. Sometime during the night, his fever had broken. She lifted the blanket to check his wound, surprised to find the bandages gone and the faint red line of a scar where a gaping slash had been stitched together the night before. A hand touched her lightly on the shoulder and she jumped, relaxing as her visitor spoke. "Be at ease, my lady." Dropping the blanket back over her sleeping patient, Calhadria glanced around to see who had spoken. "Lupus!" she cried, recognizing the dark-haired man behind her. Turning to face him, she rose and clasped his shoulders in her hands. "I am so glad to see you. When did you arrive?" "3 hours past," Lupus replied. "You did well. Many lives were saved before we arrived." Calhadria favoured him with a tired smile. "We had help," she replied. "I know," Lupus said. "A new servant of Staravan. I was most surprised." A snort interrupted them. "He tried to kill me," said another voice, and Raomar stepped into view. "Tried?" "Yes, but your men and his goddess wouldn't let him." Now that she could see him properly, Calhadria noticed the Kavarag looked grey with fatigue, the mottled pattern of his skin dull and faded. "It was a moment," Lupus admitted sheepishly, "and not one of my finest. If it weren't for Falcon, the goddess might not have been in time." He ruefully shook his head, then focused on his fellow priest. "How is she, my friend?" Romar's expression took on a haunted look. "I fear she'll need to rest longer than I can remain," he said. It. He took a deep breath and tried again. "Staravan says I must depart today. The time we have is almost gone." He glanced over his shoulder to where he'd left Brianda. "I should leave her behind," he admitted softly. "She isn't fit enough to travel." Lupus clasped his shoulder. "I can try to heal her further." He looked around. "Most of the work here was done before we arrived, and I still have enough energy to try another healing. Perhaps it will be enough?" Raomar dipped his head in agreement. "Perhaps. We'll try as soon as I've spoken to the lady here." Lupus stepped back to give him room to speak, puzzled when Raomar took a moment to scan the room before lowering his voice. I spoke with Staravan on another matter," he said. "It's something that has little to do with the old one, but it may, if left unresolved, hinder us later in the mission." He paused. "Go on," Calhadria said. Raomar cleared his throat and complied. "Travelling with us is the wizardess Alessia Mistlewood." Again he paused, as though searching for the words he needed in order to continue. "The wizardess," Calhadria confirmed. "Yes." "Her two apprentices, Sindra and Zareen, travel with her. The latter, I fear, has fallen for your shape changer and wishes to remain behind. I spoke with Alessia about it, and she is agreeable to such an arrangement, but she says it is unwise for one lover to school another in the arts of magic." "I see," Calhadria stated, and motioned for him to go on. "Is there someone else able to take on her training? An untrained wizard is dangerous, but a half-trained wizard—" He let the words trail, and Calhadria completed the sentence. "Is a danger indeed," she agreed. "I believe I know of someone of whom both the wizardess and Rurannith would approve. He trained the shape changer in his early years and is no apprentice now. If he is willing to take one on, would that suffice?" Raomar nodded. "Aye, if you recommend him, lady, I believe he would." "Then I'll arrange it," Calhadria told him. She turned toward the door. "Now, if you'll excuse me." Raomar inclined his head and turned to Lupus. "Are you ready?" "I'm ready," Lupus assured him. "Shall we?" She's sleeping now, Raomar told him. If this doesn't work, I fear she won't wake before I'm gone. If she stays, tell her she's free of any obligations to me. Tell her she's free to go her own way. He sighed and indicated the sleeping rogue. I'll leave you and make preparations, he said, and Lupus flapped a hand in dismissal as he knelt beside his patient. Go, let me call on the goddess in peace. Raomar reached the door and paused. Looking back, he said, if your healing works even a little, I'll be able to care for her. Ghost, Alessia, Grumwell, and Sindra will go with me, but we must travel west and south to the mountains, and Staravan says we must travel quickly. I'll find you supplies. Lady Calhadria had returned. She waved Raomar through the door and turned about. This way. She continued speaking as he followed her along the corridor toward the stairs. And I'll gather my friends, Raomar told her. The gods say we must leave within the hour. They took the stairs, Raomar moving toward the upper section of the building designated for sleeping, and Calhadria heading for the kitchens. She'd gone 2 steps when she turned back. I can lend you a boat and crew, she told him. If you take the river south, you'll come across a junction where another river joins it. That will take you west to a crossroad on the bank. If you follow the road to the west, you'll reach the city of Turvac. From there, it should be no great task to find horses and follow the Great Plains Road to the south trade route, and travelling by road will be faster than trying to go overland. The great swamps lie between here and Caranth. My lady, my thanks, Raomar answered. I'll come to you when we're ready to leave. See that you do, she told him tartly. I'll have your supplies in the kitchens. She smiled and hurried away, leaving him to continue up the stairs. He'd just reached the top when he heard hurried steps behind him. Turning, he saw Zareen, her face half formed into defiant refusal. Raomar schooled his expression to sternness as the girl moved to confront him. The Lady Calhadria said you wanted to see me, she said. She said you were going to leave? Well, I'm not coming with us, Raomar said, cutting her off before she could start a tirade. Zareen gaped at him, and he filled the silence. You'll stay in Kirkconnell with Rorannith, but he raised a hand to still her sudden excitement. But, he continued, you'll be apprenticed to another, since it is unwise to do otherwise. You are to complete your training and to stay out of sight of the king's forces. Is that clear? Her jaw dropped and she closed her mouth, and for a long moment she stood there, staring at him in silence. Shouldn't my mistress be telling me this? She asked in a small voice, once she'd managed to take a breath. Your mistress is sleeping, Raomar told her, gesturing for her to walk with him. But I need you to wake her. You can check the decision with her and take your leave at the same time. After that, I want you to report to Calhadria. It is she to whom you will answer until your master comes to collect you. The girl hesitated, and he waved her forward. Go, he ordered, watching her expression shift with a mixture of disbelief and joy. Go. He watched as she hurried to find Alessia, then went back to the infirmary to see how Lupus had fared with Brianda. Behind him, he heard Alessia and Zareen's voices in conversation, and knew the wizardess would soon follow. Lupus stood by the fire when he returned, the priest offering him a mug of hot char as he arrived. I fear I tarried too long, he said, taking the drink and sipping it none the less. Lupus took a sip from his own cup, but another voice interrupted before he could reply. Tarried too long for what? Brianda! Raomar turned to greet the girl. She stepped back and cocked her head. You weren't thinking of leaving me behind, were you? She asked. I was, Raomar said, but I couldn't. Staravan wouldn't let me. You, it seems, have a task to perform. Lupus muttered a small prayer, reaching out to lay a hand on the young woman's shoulder, and Raomar saw more colour return to her face. When Lupus lowered his hand, Brianda looked almost like she'd never been hurt. Almost. He could still see the memories haunting her eyes. He clasped Lupus's arm. Thank you, my friend, he said, and turned away. Go in peace and with speed, the priest replied, accepting his mug as he drained it and handed it back. And may the blessing of the gods rest upon you, Raomar replied. Alessia, Brianda, and Zareen followed as he took them to the kitchens. Sindra was already there, helping Calhadria divide their supplies into a pack for each of them, and Ghost stood beside Grunwald, keeping a wary eye on the villagers around her. Raomar's heart leapt when he saw her, glad she was still safe and coming with them. You were busy when we came in last night, Grunwald told him. I saw, though, Raomar reassured them. Ghost brightened, but she stayed near the barbarian, and Raomar was relieved to see she'd accepted a second guardian. I can't be there all the time, he thought, and hoped there wouldn't be a time when Grunwald had to take over her apprenticeship. Calhadria lifted the first pack and handed it to him. Falcon will take you back to the village, she told them, and called another man forward. And Drayon says his captain will take you upriver to the crossroads. She tapped Falcon on the shoulder. And if his captain objects, Falcon will convey my wishes. She gave him a critical look and sighed, flicking his cloak with the tip of her finger. You'll need to make good use of this until Falcon and Drayon have made their introductions and you're on the boat. I'm sorry. Raomar shrugged and flipped the cloak over his head, hiding his features within its shadows. Next he pulled his gloves from a pocket and slid them over his hands. From the corner of his eye he saw Ghost follow his movements and copy them. Calhadria picked up a smaller pack and handed it to the child. You're a quick study, she told the girl, and welcome in my home any time. Ghost ducked her head, and Raomar swore the child blushed. Her whispered, "Thank you, miss," was the tiniest sound in the room, but Calhadria heard it and smiled. She finished passing out the rest of the packs, then turned to Raomar. Go in peace and safety, High Priest, she told him. We will pray for your swift success. She clasped his hands, and he took the opportunity to pull her close in a grateful hug. Staravan's blessing upon you and your household for your kindness, he said, and his god answered, sending golden light radiating away from Raomar's hands. And upon your people and their town, he added, and the light flashed around them. Calhadria returned his hug before gently pulling away to regard him at arm's length. Go swiftly, she said, her face sober. The land is being swallowed by the king's evil, and I don't know how long we can withstand it. I'll go with all speed, he replied, turning away.